The Rules Committee will come to order. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. We are here for what my dear friend and classmate, the distinguished chair of the Committee on Appropriations, refers to as the rest of the bus measure. It's H.R. 2055, and we will begin with testimony from the gentleman from Somerset, Kentucky, and without objection, any prepared remarks that you have will appear in the record, and we welcome your summary. And I know that your partner, Mr. Dix, I have no idea what he could possibly be doing at this moment, but when he'd had the opportunity to be here. Oh, you want to ask unanimous consent to put his statement in the record already? That's what I suspected. Without objection, Mr. Dix's statement will appear in the record as if he had been here, but I hope he's sound asleep. And so, Chairman Rogers, thank you, and this has been a long and very drawn-out and challenging process, but congratulations to you and your wonderful team with whom we here in the Rules Committee have been working very closely, and we look forward to your testimony and to considering this on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm pleased to present the final fiscal year 2012 appropriations legislation, which includes H.R. 3671, the consolidated 9-bill package, as well as bills providing funding for disaster aid and recovery assistance and offsets for that funding. I'm here to request an appropriate rule on these three bills. This package represents the second year of reduced federal government spending, the first time that has occurred in modern history. Such cuts affirm our commitment to reducing spending at every turn. In fact, the Appropriations Committee has cut nearly $95 billion in discretionary spending compared to fiscal year 2010. In addition, this legislation includes absolutely no earmarks in accordance with the Republican-implemented House rule. These cuts will help draw down our deficits and get government spending on a more sustainable level and our economy on more stable footing. After weeks of tough negotiations between the House committee and our Senate counterparts, we struck meaningful bipartisan compromise on these remaining 9 appropriations bills. As in any compromise, no party got everything they wanted, but we have struck, I think, a fair and reasonable balance between reduced spending, wise federal investments, and policy changes that American businesses need to thrive. Notably, this bill provides critical funds for national security, including funding for our military engagements, benefits and programs for our veterans, active military and their families, and homeland security efforts to keep our borders and communities safe. And this legislation includes smart policy items that will help rein in job-killing government overreach and ensure that life, liberty, and freedom are protected in the United States. The second bill in the package contains $8.1 billion in disaster aid and recovery assistance by way of FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund and the Army Corps of Engineers. These funds are critical to addressing current and future disaster needs so that families and communities can get back on their feet. The next bill offsets that disaster funding by a 1.83% across-the-board cut to all 2012 base discretionary spending except the Department of Defense, Military Construction, and Veterans Affairs. This would make the disaster funding budget neutral. Mr. Chairman and members, we work very closely with our minority members, including Ranking Member Dix, whom I have the greatest of fondness and respect for, and our Senate counterparts to come to a meaningful agreement on this package of crucial legislation. We kept our noses to the grindstone and tried to avoid the partisanship that has dominated too much of the important work of Congress over the course of this year. This cooperation in committee served us well. We were able to come to bipartisan, bicameral compromise. And this agreement is reflected in the bill before us today, virtually word for word. I sincerely hope that the trust and support that we've built together on this bill will carry forward as we move through the process this week and into next year when we begin all over again. Mr. Chairman, this report and the disaster aid spending package are the final steps necessary to complete 2012 appropriations work, helping avert a potential government shutdown and supporting important domestic programs and services that the American people rely on. I'm hopeful that we will see these three bills passed expediently and on a bipartisan basis. With Christmas around the corner, it's time to provide permanent and stable funding for our government programs, one of the most basic duties of this Congress. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, and again, thanks for your fine work. And I think that you really hit the nail on the head when you said nobody gets exactly what they want. This is not the agreement that you would have wanted if we had been able to do this alone, but as you said, it's bipartisan. And I think it's important to note, and I know that we'll hear from our colleagues, we are waiving the 3-day layover requirement, and we indicated at the outset, at the beginning of this Congress, that that may be necessary if we dealt with issues as urgent as this. As we all know, just a little more than 24 hours from now, we face the prospect of a government shutdown. This measure was, if I recall this correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Rogers, I believe that it was Monday that you and Senator Inouye, the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, came to an agreement. And I was encouraged by Mr. Dix throughout this week to do everything possible to encourage movement on this. And so that today is Thursday. That was Monday. As of 12:30 last night, this measure was put online and made available for our colleagues and the American people to see. There are two changes. There are two changes to this, one of which relates to the Commodities Futures Trading Corporation, and the other, Cuban travel. And with the exception of those changes, it's my understanding that that is what we have. Those two, and they're not that they're not important and powerful, but when you look at the magnitude of the measure that we've had since Monday, by and large available, we've had online since yesterday, or since 12:30. It was right around midnight that we had it. So we actually, based on that report, we did come within about 30 minutes of complying with the 3-day layover requirement. If we had gotten it 30 minutes earlier, we would have complied with the 3-day layover requirement, with the exception of the, well, let me just say, as my colleagues roll their eyes, that one of the things that we had indicated is when we dealt with a matter that was critical to the future of the country, which I believe shutting the government down is, that we would face the prospect of waiving the 3-day layover requirement. And frankly, that's within the purview of the Rules Committee. We have the ability to do it, and I believe that we've, and my colleagues know this very well, we've done our doggonedest to ensure that we would not waive the 3-day layover requirement, and we have held to that pretty well in this Congress, but not perfectly. So I have no questions other than to say congratulations. Just tell me, have I correctly outlined the modifications that have been made here?
The Chairman is correct. Those two changes.
Right. And in light of that, I think it's important for us to do this so that we can make sure that our men and women in uniform have what they need. We're able to address the other very, very important priorities and recognize that this $95 billion in spending reductions that you put into place is a monumental achievement for us to be able to do this in a bipartisan way. So thank you very much for that. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all realize the hour is very late tonight, and we would like to get this done as soon as possible, and I hope that my colleagues across the aisle will understand that the reason we are delayed on this and that we're doing this at such a late hour is what you said before. This conference report was ready on Monday. It should have been filed then, but the Senate refused to sign, or our colleagues on the other side of the aisle refused to sign. My understanding is upon orders from the White House, although nobody knows that for sure. So if there are any complaints about why we are here at this hour on this day and why we are moving forward, those complaints need to be taken over to the Senate and to the White House, as I understand it. So I want to thank the chairman also for his hard work, and I understand there are only 2 minor changes to the bill, which mean nothing in terms of having to have read it, but one could have read it yesterday. I think we need to just put the responsibility where it lies on this, and we move on. So,
would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I would simply add to that statement that Mr. Rogers and all of us have been dealing with the aftermath of what existed in the last 2 Congresses. And as you know very well, we had no budget passed, no appropriations work done. And I know that Mr. Dix and Mr. Rogers have a great desire, as we begin next year, to have a clean slate. Passage of this in a bipartisan way will allow us to have a clean slate so that our Appropriations Committee colleagues will be able to proceed with their very important work, and I thank my friend for yielding.
Well, I thank the chairman for pointing this out, that we hear all the time about the challenges that were faced by the president when he took office. We were also facing those challenges, and as the chairman said, no budget for over 1,000 days coming out of the Senate, operating on continuing resolutions. And I think it's very important that we've gotten to this stage, and I, again, commend the chairman. I commend Mr. Dix. I'm sorry that he's not here to receive his commendations, but we appreciate the bipartisan work that you've done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McGovern.
I thank you very much for being here. I just want to just point out a couple of things. This conference report, if I understand correctly, was just filed 45 minutes ago. And the bill that Dr. Fox was talking about was filed at 12:20 this morning. This is, at last count, I think it was, this is 2,300 pages long. And I don't know, I didn't go to a speed reading school, but maybe Dr. Fox did, but I'm willing to bet that most people here didn't read this bill. And what I fear, to be honest with you, is that when all is said and done, that we're going to find things here that we didn't expect. And while I appreciate that there are only 2 changes, I want to say to Dr. Fox and others that I was here when her side was in charge, when I was told, don't worry, everything's fine, when we found out that there was immunity for big drug companies that was stuck into a bill like this.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'm happy to yield.
I wasn't here when that happened,
I
but
was.
are you talking about a conference report that was presented?
Yes.
A conference report?
Yeah, a conference report.
Which was signed off on by your colleagues as well as ours.
I'm not sure how many of my colleagues signed off on it. You were in charge at that time, and so but I do remember that very well, because a lot of my constituents were furious when they found out that things were snuck into the bill, like immunity for drug companies. So, no 3-day layover. We're all going to take everybody's word for it that there's nothing surprising in here. This is 2,300 pages long, and this is not the process that we were promised, and this is not. I don't know what to say. This is it. It is what it is. So we'll bring this to the floor tomorrow. It'll be voted up or down, but this is 2,300 pages long, and
if I may respond,
happy to yield to the gentleman.
Well, as Mrs. Fox has said, this is the cleanup bill for a mess that we inherited when we came into office, because we had not passed, the Congress had not passed an appropriations bill for fiscal 11. And so we've spent this whole year trying to catch up and clean up what was left, the mess that was left us. this is a big bill, I guarantee you that. But it has to be done. There's no other way around it, given the circumstances that we were in. My whole goal has been, along with Norman Dix and Senator Inouye, is to return the appropriations process to the regular order, so that we bring a separate bill for each of the 12 bills here to the House, to be debated in an open fashion with an open rule. That's what I want to get back to, and this will enable us to get there.
And I appreciate the gentleman's...
And on this bill, I turned to the subcommittees, both the chairman and the ranking Democrat on each of the subcommittees, and said, you prepare your bill, your part of the bill. And so the Republican chairman and the Democrat ranking member on each subcommittee had full sway to put their bill together in a bipartisan fashion. And that's taken a long time, but it was necessary, I thought, to get a responsible product here. Now, there are no earmarks in that bill, and I'm the enforcer of that rule.
No, and I appreciate that, but I'll take, I don't, no one in my office has been able to read this bill, but I appreciate it. I appreciate your assurance that, but, being in charge means taking responsibility. We can blame previous Congresses all we want, but you're in charge. So you got to take some responsibility here, and half the appropriations bills have not been brought through this House of Representatives. It has nothing to do with the Senate. It has to do with this place. So I don't want to prolong this. I'm just simply saying that it is what it is, and it's not very pretty. Yep.
Mr. Bishop.
Let me just add briefly. All of your colleagues, Democrat colleagues, have signed the report. So it's a bipartisan bill that all the members, Republican and Democrat, have signed.
No, and I appreciate that. I just, and I love my Republican colleagues and I love my Democratic colleagues, but I was represented to make sure that I do my due diligence, and I'm not going to be able to do that here. But
you've got until tomorrow sometime to read the bill.
Good luck. Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Rogers, I appreciate your efforts here. I realize that the process that you have done, I expect to find stuff in here that I do not like that will surprise me. But every year I have been here, I have found stuff in the appropriations bill that I do not like, which will surprise me.
Welcome to the company.
Yeah, there's nothing unique about that.
Yeah.
I do appreciate the effort that you and Mr. Dix have made in the process that we've gone through. In the bills that were passed out of the House, they were done in a very open and uniquely open manner that I had not seen before under either parties. So you'd be complimented on that.
Thank you.
Look, I was the speaker in Utah, and we had some advantages in what we were going to do. Number one, there was a constitutional deadline of when we had to do things. We could not have the luxury of dragging them out when we wanted to. And we also had procedures that were put in there that no one individual could play gamesmanship with the process, that no one could actually do that. Unfortunately, back here in Congress, there were several things that can happen and have happened in many parts with the other side for which you have no control. And nor does Mr. Dix have control on that. So I do appreciate what you've gone through here. I was going to do and take this opportunity of going into a rant for a while. The hour is one in which I'm not going to do that. It was very parochial. It dealt with the Department of Defense, which has a non-disclosure agreements that they have done, treating Congress as if we are the enemy. That's frustrating to me. With the new Secretary of Defense, Mr. Panetta, I really expect to see better things in the future. I do want to know, as hard as it is for me on a specific issue that deals with sustainment, in which the Air Force should have done a business case analysis and did not. I recognize that that is not in your area of expertise. And I also want to recognize that Mr. Young, who is the chairman of that area, did everything in his power to help on this situation. I'm very grateful for his efforts. It is still some of those things that is very frustrating to me and will not change until the Department of Defense does away with those silly and capricious non-disclosure agreements that were instituted by a prior secretary. I hope that changes significantly. And with that, I'm going to spare you from the rest of the rant, which I promise you, the data is here. It could have been very enlightening and very entertaining for everybody, but we're just too damn tired. So with that, I thank you.
Come on. I mean,
All right, you did. No, everyone is, so I'm not going to do that. But I do want you to know that you have done great work in conjunction with Mr. Dix. I expect it to be even better next year, and hopefully we can start a tradition that will continue on and move us in a better direction into the future. I'll go back with that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Polis.
Thank you. So what is the total size of this package, the spending package?
$915 billion.
How much of the $915 billion is deficit spending above and beyond revenues?
I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Is the way that we calculate the deficit, we spend the receipts as they come in, or have we effectively spent all the receipts and almost at this point any additional spending would be deficit spending?
Well, the Budget Control Act, which was passed a couple of months ago, gave the Appropriations Committee the authority to expend this amount of money. And we are well within the parameters, the limits of that law.
I think, would it be fair to say that most, if not all, of the $915 billion is deficit spending? If we were to stop spending now, I assume our deficit would be close to zero, maybe a small one, maybe a small surplus. But the $950 billion, it's pretty much all deficit spending, is that correct?
About a third of the federal spending is appropriated monies. Two-thirds are entitlement spending, mandated by laws, over which our committee has no control or authority. If you struck out all of the discretionary spending, military, national parks, border patrol, Interior Department, Agriculture Department, everything, if you zeroed out everything, because of the entitlement spending, we would still be in the red. So the problem with controlling the deficit is not in the appropriated accounts. We appropriate about a third of the total spending, more than half of which is defense, which means that the rest of the non-defense discretionary spending is about 12% roughly. And that's the amount of money, that's the pot of money that we've had to do all of this cutting. And we're getting to the bare bones, to be frank with you, on the non-defense discretionary accounts. Until there is the will to discipline entitlement spending, you will never get to a deficit neutral bill.
It doesn't sound like much cutting to me if it's mostly deficit spending. It's my understanding the deficit is close to $1 trillion. We're about to spend close to $1 trillion. If we didn't spend it, we would largely wipe out the deficit, but we are spending it, so we're going to have $1 trillion deficit. Is that correct or incorrect, that analysis?
Well, the gentleman is entitled to his statement.
Well, it's not an opinion. I'm just wondering, if we didn't spend this money, we would not have a deficit. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, you would.
Okay, that's what I wanted to specify. Okay, and then the only other question.
Total spending is well over $3 trillion a year. About $1 trillion of that is discretionary appropriated monies.
That's about the size of the deficit, if I'm not mistaken, about $1 trillion. Is that roughly correct?
Well, $1.3 trillion, roughly.
So, yeah. The only other question I have is with regards to Cuba. How is the Cuba issue resolved? I know this was one of the issues for the final negotiation. American citizens visiting their families and friends in Cuba. How was that resolved?
We took this in.
If the gentleman yield, I have the language here. If it's before us. If you'd like me to share that, I have the exact language here. If you'd like me to share an outline on it, it just says the removal of language that would have changed travel and remittances restrictions related to Cuba. That's Section 634, and the removal of language clarifying the Department of Treasury's cash in advance rule regarding certain U.S. exports to Cuba, which is Section 632. So basically there's, the interpretation of it is that we are not going to be reinstating the language that existed in the last administration.
Will the gentleman yield?
I will in a moment. And before I say anything, I'm glad the gentleman that was sitting here last session is no longer here, because I would be in jeopardy if he was, with his passion on this issue. But I do think that represents the will of this Congress fairly clearly, and I'm very glad that we're not trying to do something that is only desired, however intensely, by a very small minority of members. I think that this has broad consensus on both sides of the aisle. I'll be happy to yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Just say I want to thank the gentleman for making the necessary adjustments in that Cuba language, which I thought was wrong to begin with, but I think this reflects what the American people want. I want to thank the gentleman for that.
And it further, I think, reflects what this Congress wants. I mean, certainly not universally, but I believe that it's a majority on both sides, and I think is the right policy as well. We are, in fact, no longer fighting the Cold War. I think there was strong bipartisan consensus for stricter sanctions against Iran. There is a threat of a nuclear Iran, which is unacceptable to the United States. But at this point, letting people visit their families and send remittances to a country where the aging despot has retired and are engaging in as many capitalist experiments as China was maybe 10 years ago, and will hopefully be developing in that direction, I think makes common sense. I'm glad that provision is in there, although, as I said, I'm disappointed that this will result in a large deficit for our country. I think that's very unfortunate. That's why I support a balanced budget amendment, and I hope that we can work to pass one and get the necessary two-thirds majority in this body to do so, and I yield back.
Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, am sorry Mr. Dick's isn't here. He has a very calming influence on me when he's here, and I tell him that he's missed. It doesn't much matter to me whether it was 45 minutes ago or 12 hours ago or even 3 days ago. When we're talking about 3,000 pages, I'm not fast enough to get through it in 72 hours anyway. Had this gone through the normal process, it would have been 27 days to read through 9 bills instead of what we've come to now. And I'm not excited about that. But this being my first year in Congress, they tell me before this year we passed 0 of the appropriations bills through this House. And this year you managed to push half the appropriations bills through this House. Now, is half good enough? No, it's not. And I've never heard you defend it as being good enough. I've only heard you say this is a step in the right direction. Norm Dix and I are working on this, and we're going to get it all done next year. And I just say, did a telephone town hall meeting with folks this evening. They had great interest in this bill and had great interest in the promises and commitments that this Congress made at the beginning of the year. And folks wanted answers to why it is we've got 3,000 pages before us. But when presented in the light of, good grief, that's 6 bills better than last year and halfway to our goal for next year. I have gone through a great number of the pages. I appreciate the time you and all your cardinals and your staff spent with us this afternoon to go through page by page and answer concern by concern. It shouldn't take that kind of investment. We ought to be able to get through it on our own. But given these extraordinary circumstances, you all have spent an extraordinary amount of time investing in members to make sure that they knew what was in here, and I appreciate that.
Well, I don't like an omnibus either. Probably more so than you. But we were brought to this place because in the House, we passed through the House, as you mentioned, 6 of the appropriations bills, 6 of the 12. We sent them to the other body, and they just lay there. And so we were left no choice, but in order to keep a shutdown from taking place, to put all of these bills together. I don't like that either, and I'm determined to stop it. And so this will clean up the mess we were left. We've spent the whole year with H.R. 1 and then the debt ceiling debate, and then passing these separate bills on the floor. When we finish this bill for fiscal 12, for fiscal 13, which we will begin work on in January, we will now be able to try to pass each bill separately, which is the way it should be, brought to the floor separately under an open rule, hopefully, allowing members to make amendments, to debate it at great length if they desire, and get back to regular order. That's what my whole goal is, and we're going to get there with this bill. Thank you.
Well, you and Mr. Dix always come here asking for open rules, not asking for waivers, asking for regular order and allowing the House to work its will. And if we can do some things here tonight that get you back on the track to follow that process from this point forward, I'm enthusiastic about it, and I thank you for all the work you've put in.
This is a bipartisan bill from the very beginning. Mr. Dix and his ranking Democrats on the subcommittees had full sway on the bills. Many of their recommendations are in the bill. I believe in bipartisanship. I think that's what the Appropriations Committee has to do, because we have to pass bills, because we don't have the luxury of not passing bills because the government would shut down. So we have worked in a bipartisan fashion across the aisle. It worked on this bill, and I think it's a great testimony, if you will, to the benefits of comity and understanding other people's points of view.
Mr. Chairman, to my knowledge, though I came here as part of a budget-cutting freshman class, to Mr. Polis's point, I don't think we've saved one penny on the mandatory side of things this entire year. I think every dollar that we've been able to save for the American taxpayer has come through this committee in the appropriations process, the continuing resolution process, and I'm grateful to you and Mr. Dix for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'd be thrilled if we get back to regular order. I've never seen anything as crazy in my life as these repeated CRs that we went through in this last year. There is no way I would think that the appropriators could do their job when you're constantly scrambling every month in regards to coming up with a new CR. And I agree, with Mr. McGovern. Last thing that I want to see is 3,000 pages or 2,000 pages all at one time. It's more than anybody, I think, can digest.
If you'd yield.
Yes, sir.
You're talking just about reading it. I don't like putting it together.
I can imagine.
And all the months it took to fashion this bill.
And so as we move, and all I can do is encourage you, sir, and your committee to now that we got this through, or we will get this through, that we get back to regular order so we have time. So members on both sides of the aisle have plenty of time to digest the information that's coming up.
That's my goal.
And I know you want to do that, and so all I can do is my prayers are with you and the committee that actually happens. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott. Mr. Webster. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your great work. I've often said that for the members of this committee, there will be a reward in heaven.
You've said that to me many times, and that's one of the reasons I like having you testify before the committee, because I hope somebody's listening to you. I hope very much that somebody's listening to you. I can assure you that we always listen to you here and appreciate your being here. So that will close the hearing, and we're propose to report out the rule. So
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The chair, everyone has a copy of the rule. The chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee report one rule for consideration of the conference report to accompany H.R. 2055, the bill H.R. 3672, and H. Conres 94. The rule waives all points of order against the conference report to accompany H.R. 2055, the Military Construction and Veterans Affairs and Related Agencies Appropriations Act 2012, and against its consideration. The rule provides that the conference report shall be considered as read. The rule provides that the previous question shall be considered as ordered without intervention of any motion except 1 hour debate and one motion to recommit if applicable. The rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 3672, the Disaster Relief Appropriations Act 2012, under a closed process. The rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides one motion to recommit. The rule also provides for consideration of H. Con. Res. 94, directing the clerk of the House of Representatives to make corrections in the enrollment of H.R. 3672 under a closed process. The rule provides 20 minutes of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the concurrent resolution and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the concurrent resolution. The rule provides one motion to recommit without instructions. The rule provides that the clerk shall not transmit to the Senate a message that the House has passed H.R. 3672 until notified by the Speaker or by message from the Senate that the Senate has taken the question on adoption of H. Con. Res. 94 as adopted by the House. The rule provides that it shall be in order at any time through the legislative day of December 16, 2011, for the Speaker to entertain motions that the House suspend the rules relating to a measure continuing appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2012. Finally, the rule waives Clause 6A of Rule 13, requiring a two-thirds vote to consider a rule on the same day it is reported from the Rules Committee against any resolution reported through the legislative day of December 31, 2011, providing for consideration or disposition of any of the following measures. 1. A measure relating to expiring provisions of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, a measure relating to the Medicare payment system for physicians, and a measure relating to appropriations for the fiscal year ending September 30, 2012.
You've heard the motion of the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community. Let me explain the rule, if I might. She's stated it, and I will try to briefly go through this. This is the standard rule for consideration of a conference report, which will allow for an hour of debate on the conference report beyond the hour that we'll have for consideration of the rule. It provides a closed rule for consideration of the disaster assistance with an hour of debate on that. It provides for consideration of an enrollment correction to the disaster assistance bill that provides for offsets to the disaster assistance that will be debatable for an additional 20 minutes. It conditions the transmittal of the disaster assistance bill on a Senate vote on the offsets. It doesn't have anything to do with the outcome of that vote, but the transmittal will take place only after the Senate has cast a vote on it. And again, because we're at this late hour and it will take work to put this together, it allows for consideration of a suspension that will provide for a short-term continuing resolution to ensure that the paperwork is done and that we have the ability to get everything in order for the President to be able to sign the bill. And then, of course, as was said at the end of the motion, we have same-day authority, which will allow for consideration of measures that relate to either this appropriations work product or the measure of the extenders dealing with the payroll tax UI and the SGR issue. So are there any amendments to the rule?
I have a question.
Mr. McGovern.
You mentioned that the rule allows for there to be for the consideration of a continuing resolution. Can you tell us how long that CR might be?
It would, I believe, go until possibly probably to like Friday of next week, just to make sure that there's not absolute certainty as to when the work product can be completed to get through the Senate to the President's desk. But I suspect it will be sometime the middle to the end of next week.
I just say, one final comment here, that, again, this is 2,300 pages long. Mm-hmm. And as much as I appreciate the assurances that there's not much that's changed in here, from experience being up here when I was in the minority and you were in the majority, I remember a time when immunity from prescription drug companies was snuck in here and no one knew about it. So I would also, again, urge that my colleagues on my side of the aisle just also understand that there's some things that are out of your control. You can't control what the Senate does, but there are some things that are in your control, and half the appropriations bills that were not passed in this House. It had nothing to do with the Senate. So I would urge that you vote no on this rule, because I have no idea what the hell's in this bill. So
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for that. Mr. Polis.
Under this rule, what happens if the Senate, in fact, does not adopt H-Con Res 94? Is the passage of 3672 never transmitted to the Senate?
No, it will be, regardless of the outcome, it will still be transmitted.
They need to have a...
They just need to have a vote.
Okay, they need to have a vote on
Right.
that conference resolution. Right. Okay, and the only other question I had is, if I'm reading this correctly, the continuing resolution, it looks like, under this rule, could be offered all the way through September 30th, 2012. Is that correct?
Let me just say that obviously we have this work product that is before us, and we would like to have had it. We wanted to have it on Monday. I mean, when Senator Inouye and Congressman Rogers shook hands, they had an agreement on Monday, and it's taken this long for us to get here, and we've had a discussion on this already. I'm not going to say anything further on that, other than to say that because we are here, it is necessary for us to have a continuing resolution in order so that we can get this work product that we're reporting out done. And so I think it's safe to say that the goal is to have a continuing resolution that would probably not extend beyond the end of next week.
But under the rule, it leaves the door open, and I assume that this is deliberate, for a long-term continuing resolution instead of the
let me just say, that's not the case at all, because we have this, the Democrats and Republicans have come together to sign the conference report on this measure, and so we have a final work product before us. And the goal is to get that work product to the President's desk as quickly as possible. The only reason that we need a continuing resolution is to ensure that that gets there. I don't think it'll take until September of next year to make that happen. And so there's not a date certain put on this, but the goal is to have it just as quickly as possible.
Okay, I yield back.
Thank you. Any amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentlewoman from grandfather committee. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. From the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox.
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
Clerk report the total.
7 yeas, 2 nays.
And the motion is agreed to, and I will be managing this for the majority, and Ms. Slaughter for the minority. And we have no time set for our next meeting, but stay tuned, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow.
What will this be on the floor tomorrow, do you know?
Well, our scheduled convening time is 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and this is the priority item, so about 10 o'clock probably, after we have a series of 1 minutes and go through all that. So,
And Mr. Chair, you would anticipate this committee would meet at some point after that, is that correct?
well, it depends on, we're not going to meet when this is on the floor, I can assure you that. Since I'll be there, I don't plan to convene the committee at the same time. So you can rest assured of that. That's one thing we can be certain of. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.